Hello, I'm Patrick Hwu. I'm president of the Society for the Immunotherapy of Cancer, or SITC, as well as president and CEO of the Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida. We are extremely privileged today to have Dr. Ned Sharpless joining us, who is the 15th director of the National Cancer Institute. Dr. Sharpless was trained in the University of North Carolina, where he did his undergraduate and medical school degrees. He then trained in Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital, as well as the Dana-Farber Cancer Center. After that, he did a faculty position at Harvard, followed by being on faculty at the University of North Carolina, where he became their Cancer Center Director in 2014. Dr. Sharpless has many accolades to his CV. He has a number of patents. He has done some incredible basic and translational research. And we are really fortunate to have someone of his talent and caliber as director of the National Cancer Institute, since it is such an important institution in our country. So welcome, Dr. Sharpless.
Happy to be here, and thank you for having me. And I look forward to talking about all the areas of mutual interest between SITC and the NCI.
Fantastic. So tell us, how did you get interested in medicine and research in the first place? Because you did an undergraduate, I can see, in mathematics.
I was one of those undergrads who kind of didn't know what they wanted to do when they grew up, and I tried lots of things. My parents both were physicians, so I knew what that life was like, and at least from that sense of being the child of a physician. And so at the end of undergraduate studies, I applied for lots of different things and ended up going to med school. And I liked medical school quite a lot. I really enjoyed, particularly the second year where you focus on pathophysiology and learning how disease works, and then the clinical rotations I really enjoyed, and that led to oncology as a career, where I thought it was. I particularly like the specialties where you had a long-standing relationship with patients, but also you had to kind of know all of medicine. That was appealing. The various problems that would come up in oncology, sort of seemed to require a comprehensive knowledge of medicine, and that was an aspect that really appealed to me. Plus the ability to know the same individual for a long time.
Yeah, well, certainly mathematics and medicine and science is integrating so much now with all the onslaught of data that we have, and the importance of informatics. Do you find that math is going to be more and more important in what we're doing in cancer research?
Yeah, no, I think mathematics is a very good training for a physician. If you start looking, you'll notice that it's actually there are quite a few of us around who, people who have a mathematical bent who then got into biology and medicine later. It's funny. I kind of didn't use math that much, other than statistics, really, as a PI. Doing mouse genetics, but then as RNA expression profiling and now other kinds of aspects of genomic data have become really very important in cancer research, I had to kind of relearn a lot of that math. So I dusted up my linear algebra textbooks and principal component analysis and stuff like that. So I think now it's really you really can't be a modern geneticist without having some understanding of big data and handling large data sets. And so I think, that kind of training will be very critical for many scientists in biology going forward.
You've done such great research in signaling and molecular biology, and some of your work has been really interesting in senescence and aging. There's just an article the other day in national publication talking about aging and how really, if we solve the aging situation, we've solved cancer and heart disease and others. Tell us a little bit about that work that you did in senescence and aging.
Sure. I got into that as an oncologist. So I was, at the time studying the mechanisms that prevent cancer, that prevent neoplastic conversion of cells, and, the various tumor suppressor mechanisms, and became very interested in the locus, the CDKN2A locus, or the P16 locus, that is, we didn't know at the time, but turns out to be a major mediator of senescence. So it's a program that a damaged cell somehow knows it's damaged, and to prevent malignant conversion, it activates this locus. And so that became a very fruitful set of studies, because we learned to use the activation of the locus as a signal, and so we could make mice that when they turned on the allele, that locus, we could tell. and therefore would have markers, and we can knock that gene out and, affect the ability of cells to undergo senescence. And during that, that sort of 20-year period, we learned a lot about what SITC does. It started out as sort of this very cancer-focused program, but we and others came to appreciate it might have some role in aging, and the accumulation of senescent cells with aging was good in that you didn't get cancer. You prevented these cells from undergoing malignant conversion, but it was bad in that those cells were sort of toxic in their own right in some ways. And that led to this notion of like trying to measure age by, enumerating senescent cells in some way, which is, I think, an idea that still has scientific legs and is being developed by many. And then also the idea that you could deplete senescent cells with beneficial effect in some way. And that's the whole senolytic idea that is, I think, really an open question as to whether or not that'll help people, but it's certainly undergoing furious investigation right now. It has, I think, still, it's got a very strong connection to cancer. We believe that, some therapies probably promote senescence in a way. Also, therapies untowardly promote senescence of healthy cells. And so, some of our therapies for cancer promote molecular aging in a sense. And so there's, still quite intricate links. And one of the fun things about working at the National Cancer Institute has been this interaction with the National Institute of Aging, which they're interested in cancer and we're interested in aging. And so we have a lot of interesting joint conversations. And one of the things that's come out of that is a new initiative focused on senescence from the Common Fund. So really to try and get the rest of the NIH interested in the effects of senescence in various tissues like the kidney, the brain, et cetera. So I think it's an area where there's a lot going on scientifically, and it really started as a cancer question: is why don't cells turn malignant when they have a RAS mutation, for example?
Well, that's really exciting. The interface between senescence, aging, and cancer, and how it can help other areas of aging and disease. These interfaces of science are extremely important. The other interfaces, for example, infectious diseases and cancer, the COVID vaccine, for example, came from cancer research, cancer immunology, and then the COVID vaccine. So there's still a lot of integration. So as the director of the National Cancer Institute, are you integrating many of these fields, such as with the infectious disease groups and cancer?
Yeah, no, we work very closely with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease in a number of ways, in a number of joint projects prior to the pandemic. And then, of course, the pandemic has even made those sorts of interactions more intimate. As you know, there's a long and distinguished history at the NCI studying virology. People like Harold Varmus and Bob Gallo and Doug Lowy and John Schiller. There are a number of scientists at the NCI who've really studied the way viruses promote cancer, or sort of the basic virology that has led to so many important molecular biology discoveries. But I think your point your observation makes one really important point, is that a lot of this true basic science that the NCI funds, this basic biology that we support, you kind of never know where that's going to go. I mean, I think that, CAR T cells, for example, I think were developed with, lymphoma and malignant disease in mind. But now I think there's a sense they could be useful in non-malignant disease like, lupus or HIV. So, therapies that we're working on, or ideas that we're working on with the NCI, it's really basic science, and it could be quite beneficial to other areas, other scientific disciplines. And the opposite is also true. Things that the basic science of infectious disease may turn out to be quite useful for cancer. And that's why I think it's so important that the NCI support basic science, because that leads to the ideas that can be quite transformational across multiple disease areas, not just cancer. And so I think that the NCI really, as part of our mission, has to support the wild and crazy ideas that come from investigator-initiated research as a big part of our mandate now and forever, really.
Yeah, and as you know, I've worked there at the National Cancer Institute for 14 years, and I agree with you and credit the National Cancer Institute for keeping the field of tumor immunology alive, because it kept that field alive when actually no one else believed in tumor immunology. So really credit the whole field, the blossoming field now, to the fact that the National Cancer Institute was there. You had become the director at UNC in 2014, and I know from my friends there, you were just totally beloved at the University of North Carolina. Then you got the opportunity to become the National Cancer Institute director in 2017. What pulled you over to the National Cancer Institute?
Well, I think that really there was this immense appeal to this opportunity to go into federal service. So My father had been in the military and had talked about his time in the military, and it wasn't really a big deal. He sort of would bring it up, once a year on, Memorial Day or something. But for the most part, he was a pathologist and worked in the hospital, and it was an ex, Army man. And then after he died, I remember the Army sends someone to present a flag to my mom and say some remarks about my dad, thanking him for his service in the military. And I remember at that, and this was in 2010. And at that time, I really thought, I would like to do something for this country that I love so much. And, there must be some way I can serve in the federal government. I didn't, think I was really, a great candidate for the military, but helping out at the NIH, that was, more up my alley. And so when the White House called about, me considering taking on this job, I was very eager. I really thought that would be something I could do that would use the gloves, cancer science opportunity to really try and help make progress against, for public health benefit. And so I was very enthusiastic about the prospects of working at the NCI. And in fact, I went in and talked to my dean about it at the time, Bill Roper, who had Bill ran CDC and HCFA. So he was an experienced Fed, and asked him about the prospects of entering federal service. And he to his credit, said, definitely do that. If you have the opportunity to go work at the NIH, you should. It's a wonderful job. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity. It's been a fantastic experience working in federal government. I had this interesting sabbatical at the FDA where I learned a lot, and really enjoyed that time I spent as acting commissioner at the FDA. But very happy to be back now at the NCI, where it's a wonderful group of people working on a wonderful set of problems for public health benefit, and with this real sense of mission and priority. And so it's really extremely great to be around. The pandemic has been disruptive and has been challenging in many ways, but I really think the people of the NCI have risen to this challenge and have, done everything they can to keep cancer science going to the utmost possible, and then also to make things to minimize the impact on patients to the extent possible.
Well, we're certainly fortunate that you decided to take the position as director of the National Cancer Institute. But I bet when you became the director, you didn't foresee that we were going to have a pandemic a few years later. Tell us how COVID has affected cancer research and cancer care nationwide.
Right. I think the pandemic has been very disruptive in all those activities in a number of ways. Maybe it's important to say a little bit about the history. Since the 1990s, the cancer mortality has been steadily declining in the United States for a variety of reasons: better screening and prevention and tobacco control, and also new therapies. And then against that, backdrop of steady progress for 30 years, we have this pandemic occur, which has messed things up in a number of ways. And we're very concerned about the impact of the pandemic on cancer care and cancer research. So, for example, we know during the first few months of the pandemic, screening in the United States precipitously dropped. So more than 95% reductions in things like mammography and lung cancer, low-dose TC screening for lung cancer, and cervical cancer screening, and colon cancer screening. And we also know during that period, new diagnoses of cancer dropped on the order of 50%. And not solely screen-detected cancers, but also cancers like pancreatic cancer, which is generally found at symptomatic evaluation. So, pretty much across the board decline in cancer diagnosis. Obviously, there's no reason to believe the cancer incidence declined by 50% during that period. So we think those cancers are just going to inevitably be diagnosed in the large majority at later stage when they become symptomatic or when a screening does resume to the extent possible. And we're worried about the possible upstaging and the effects that would have on cancer mortality and cancer curability. We now have started to see, we sort of predicted this would happen based on modeling done back in April, done by the NCI CISNet network. But now we've seen data that this is actually occurring, both, CMS claims data or electronic health record data from things like Epic and various single academic institutions. These sorts of things have also occurred in other countries, like the UK has very good data that they're seeing delayed diagnosis and upstaging. And so, I think really we need the cancer community to take collective action to try and minimize the impact, make this as least bad as possible for our patients. And we're starting to see that. The American Cancer Society is a vibrant return to screening effort to try and make up for some of these missed screenings. We may have on the order of 1 million missed screenings during 2020. We've seen like the American College of Surgeons recommend triage criteria for how to, what sorts of surgeries can be deferred and what sorts of surgeries have to be prioritized. We've had ASCO and NCCN provide guidelines on appropriate care for patients during the pandemic, and again, how to provide therapy during the pandemic, and how to what sorts of procedures can be postponed. ASTRO has weighed in with recommendations on how to give good radiation care during the pandemic, and so I think it's been, and I've really been struck by the ingenuity of caregivers on how they could figure out how to take care of their patients in a way that's safe for the patient and for the caregivers, but also allows them to provide optimal cancer care. But we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. You also asked about the effect on cancer research, and we know that there's been a tremendous impact. Labs have been closed. We know clinical trials have had vast reductions in accrual, which delays the useful data for patients. And we have a number of budgetary concerns related to fixed costs that occurred during the pandemic, but where research really didn't occur, so that will require some funding from the NCI to, make up for those that missed period of productivity. So there's a number of financial issues pressing to the NCI now because of the pandemic. So we're really worried about, the impact of the pandemic on research productivity. We've tried to do a number of things to address this. We've, made it very clear that we'll work with PIs and investigators around flexibility around their grants, so issues like carryover and grant deadlines and things like that. We've tried very hard to make it easier to do clinical trials during the pandemic. So with the FDA, we've, changed what's a protocol deviation or consent by phone we've allowed, or we've allowed the shipping of oral investigational agents, IND drugs directly to patients so they wouldn't have to go into a hospital pharmacy. And, and we've done a number of activities for trainees. Training has been very disrupted by the pandemic. And so we've tried to provide ways for trainees to get cost extensions to their grants if needed, or to add on date, extend the period of their training if needed. So we're trying to support the research community in every way possible. But, this is a once in a lifetime disruptive event, and it's been very challenging.
Well, we really appreciate as a field the flexibility that the National Cancer Institute has had towards researchers nationwide. Going away from COVID now, as you know, SITC is an immunotherapy organization, and we appreciate you've spoke at our national meetings before, so thank you for that. Tell us about the National Cancer Institute and your views on immunotherapy and the importance of immunotherapy in the treatment of cancer.
Yeah, no, this has been a tremendously exciting set of developments during my career as an oncologist. And I will say right from the unabashedly and with some shame that I was one of those oncologists that sort of didn't believe in this in the early days. I thought, wow, this is crazy. This is never going to work. But thankfully, you alluded, I think, to the work of people like Steve Rosenberg in the NCI intramural program, who really kept this idea alive and believed tumor immunology could be good for patients and proved the skeptics like me wrong. And the results have been, I think, extraordinarily successful. And now, I really talk about this fourth modality that we have, chemotherapy, this kind of classical cytotoxic chemotherapy and surgery and radiation and this whole new toolbox of immunotherapy approaches. And so I think a really important thing for the NCI is to, how to support the clinical trials development of these agents, which is complicated. A lot of the paradigms have to change. Measuring things like response and, resistance to immunotherapy agents is some of the traditional approaches don't apply, as you know. But also, I think we really have to continue to fund the basic science that supports, the basic understanding of the immune system, its interaction with cancer, and still, area where I think is fascinating biology and really, some of the new technologies like single cell sequencing and, new medicinal chemistry approaches and are really, I think, impactful in that area. And so I think it's exciting to wed these new technologies to a really important problem like, tumor immunology. I also think there's a role here for the NCI, for certain kinds of support of the clinical development of certain kinds of agents. So the pharmaceutical industry does a really good job of combining PD-1 inhibitors with other agents, right? I mean, that's a trial that, Merck and others do really, really well, and maybe not the thing high priority for the NCI. unless it's a really complicated trial or a complicated agent, but where I think that there is a possible need for more support from the National Cancer Institute or around cellular immunotherapy trials, which is still quite challenging because of the manufacturing and regulatory issues and compliance issues. And so I think there's a place where if the federal government can help de-risk these technologies a little more by showing that they work, and particularly allowing trials to be multi-institutional. If a single institution study is not nearly as convincing as something that, the same CAR construct that can be done at multiple places with beneficial effect. So I think that's an area where, the federal government has a specific role to facilitate a very important kind of clinical research in immuno-oncology. But I think the suite of activities of the NCI now is very robust. As you know, the Cancer Moonshot, which began in 2017, has a major focus on cancer immunology, both in adults and children, both in basic science and translational clinical work. So I think it's really an established modality now, and it's important that the NCI work with groups like SITC to try and advance that mission.
Wonderful. What's really exciting about the cell therapy support and the CAR T facility that's being built in Frederick. I worked for a summer in Frederick. I really love that place at the National Cancer Institute. So tell us about the Moonshot program. What's the future hold for that program? Is it going to continue? Is it going to be renewed?
Right. So the Moonshot, as you know, was started in 2017. It was appropriated. The idea was for 7 years. So it would be $1.8 billion over 7 years, sunsetting in 2023. So we're a little more than midway through. We're just starting. Well, we're midway into year 5. And I think, it's clear that the translational focus of the Moonshot on new initiatives at the NCI has I think, been quite impactful and successful. So, if you go to our website, there's ample information about the Moonshot, but it's kind of overwhelming. I mean, there are like 240 new programs. Remember, there was this blue ribbon panel that came up with sort of 10 priority areas for research. And then with each of those priority areas, there have been multiple new initiatives. Many of these are large, complex networks like the Immuno-Oncology Network, Translational Network, and a drug discovery network in pediatric immuno-oncology, for example. So, really extensive new efforts to both, for sort of more, basic translational science and then frank clinical trials. And it's still got a few more years to go. So it's at the stage now where, most of the money being in the in 22, 23 is just to support the out years of the prior grants. And it's a good time to talk about what comes next. As you know, really the architect of Moonshot 1.0, or the initial Moonshot, was Vice President Biden then, and now President Biden is certainly very focused on cancer research, and I think has made many public statements about his interest in, to use his phrase, ending cancer as we know it. And we've now seen some indication of how the president would like to do this. I think the president's budget came out last week and suggested significant new funding for basic biologic research, but importantly, the creation of a new entity called ARPA, which is an advanced DARPA-like entity with DARPA-like authorities, with the idea that would take on some amount of cancer research. So this is the White House's proposal on how to take on this problem. Congress now has to take this up and decide if they would like to do that this way. This is an idea at the present moment, is not a funded entity, but it's very exciting. I think the prospects of significant new funding for cancer research using a new agency like ARPA could be really transformational in cancer research.
Wonderful. It really is exciting, this new agency. From what I understand, it's going to be under the NIH and going to include not just cancer, but Alzheimer's and many other diseases that afflict the human situation. So how will this new agency interface with the National Cancer Institute in the initiatives?
Right. Well, I think importantly, the only thing we really know about ARPA today is in the president's budget. And that Congress may or may not use as their blueprint. As an example, my first year at NCI, the president's budget under then President Trump included a 26% cut to the NCI budget that year. Congress ended up giving us a pretty significant increase that year. So what Congress did versus what the president proposed was completely different. I don't think that'll be the case here. I think that there's widespread bipartisan support for cancer research in Congress, and I suspect many members of Congress are very eager to support the NIH and the NCI with additional funds and authorities for research. So, but we'll see. I mean, Congress is going to take this up, and we'll see what emerges. As you stated, the version proposed by the White House would have ARPA within the NIH. I think that is a good way to do it. That would be reassuring for the cancer community, in that the NCI and the NIH work together on everything. We're very heavily integrated. We work closely with Francis Collins and their other ICs, the other institutes and centers in the NIH, and so I think that would be a better way for the NCI to interact with this newer organization that is going to have cancer research within it, as well as research in other diseases, rather than create a new federal agency that's different, which might work, but also might be complicated. It is rather straightforward for the NCI to work with the NIH. There are a couple of models within the NIH. The NIH has, the ability to set up new institutes. So NCATS was a recent new institute. The NIH could, it has the Common Fund model, which is, provides resources for new specific topics. And then there are lots of other varieties beyond those too. So the details of how this will work, should it happen at all, and again, that's up to Congress, are still unclear. But I think the president's budget vision was very bold and strong, including significant new funding and significant new authorities, and highly focused on cancer, and then also some other diseases.
What's encouraging is that for 2 years in a row now, the death rate from cancer is starting to plateau and decrease some, largely because of the advances in immunotherapy, personalized medicine, and targeted therapy. What do you think is going to be necessary to really drive that death rate down to the x-axis?
The decline in cancer mortality has been going on for a while, which I think, for decades has been attributable to tobacco control and other things. I think really now in the last few years has where therapy has started to become much more important in that, as you say, and I think that reflects immuno-oncology and targeted therapies to some extent. And I actually predict those data are going to play out for a little while longer, because the most recent mortality data year that's complete is 2018, and if you look in that year, immuno-oncology really hadn't fully penetrated to many diseases, even lung cancer, for example. So I think because of the extraordinary activity of agents like PD-1 and PD-L1 antibodies, in lung cancer and other diseases, the effect of new therapies on cancer mortality is going to be pretty good for a while. But, declining at 2.5% per year is better than we've ever done. That would be the most rapid drop in the history of statistics for cancer, but it's still not good enough. If we really want to end cancer as we know it, the way the president described, we'd have to accelerate that further. And so, I think a reasonable question to ask is, how would you do that? I am of the belief that there will be no silver bullets. There will be no single breakthrough or single idea that will change everything. I suspect it will be the entire, pantheon of tools that we have in screening and prevention and early, better diagnosis and better therapy and enhanced survivorship. All of those things will conspire to, we'll see progress in all of those areas, and that will really have outsized effects. So I think, and then you can just start working within each of those areas. I think, we clearly have a ways to go to understand how to make these extraordinary responses we see in the minority of patients with immuno-oncology agents, the majority of patients, right? That would be a really fruitful area for future research. I've already spoken about the idea of, making cellular immunotherapy more available widely through building some national infrastructure. But I think also there's, really interesting technologies in early detection, both better imaging that, combines machine learning with novel imaging modalities, as well as, the use of these multi-cancer early detection tests, which are blood-based tests. This is the sort of GRAIL and THRIVE and other technologies that are being discussed that can find cancer, presumably at a stage where it's more treatable and would allow for a reduction in cancer mortality through, converting cancers that would become, late stage cancers that would be untreatable, making them early stage cancers that are resectable for cure, for example. So I think that, there are a number of ideas in every one of those areas I mentioned that could be quite impactful. And, one of the challenges for the NCI is how to, prioritize all this good stuff. It's very different from when we started out in oncology in like 2000. There weren't that many good ideas. Now there are lots of good ideas. There's so many good ideas. It's like, which one do you try first? In immuno-oncology alone, there's so many clinical trials, the prioritization of patients, as you know, is challenging. So, I think we're in a better place today than we were 20 years ago, but we really need to continue to make rapid progress for the benefit of our patients.
Great. Now, one thing is just implementing what we know. For example, the HPV vaccine, which was developed at the National Cancer Institute, how do we just get that out to the world? It seems like we have the recipe. We just need to get everyone to take it. So implementing is something that I'm sure the National Cancer Institute is working on. And that's one of the areas where we can just decrease the disparities that we see in cancer outcomes. It's still disheartening to see that you just plug someone's zip code in and you can see how they're going to do with their cancer. So what's your thoughts about that, and how are we going to level the playing field and the outcomes from cancer?
If we could just do what we know works in a lot of the patients who are not benefiting from these approaches, that would have tremendous impact, and particularly beneficial for populations that are underserved and have reduced access, and where dissemination of great new ideas has been challenging. So one observation to make is that the pandemic has really disrupted the topic of implementation science. My joke about this is, if you're an implementation scientist, your moment has arrived, because we saw the entire country go from inpatient visits to telehealth in like a 2-week period. Nothing like that is ever going to happen again, with massive changes of the behavior of the payers and flexibility from the FDA and the NCI. So I think there's a great research opportunity to really figure out, if any of these new abilities, phone visits or care across state lines, or these things will really help reach some of these underrepresented populations, and will help with implementation and access. It's not clear that they will. You can imagine that moving more to telehealth could be adverse for populations that don't have good internet access, for example. So I think it's a really important research question to figure out, what are the effects of a new ability like telehealth on underrepresented minority patients, on low access patients, and does it worsen or relieve disparities, for example? There's a tremendous interest in the topic of communication around cancer knowledge. So, we know the HPV vaccine works and prevents cervical cancer. That's an unequivocal finding now, but we still don't have the uptake in the United States that we would like. We know that, smoking cessation is something that everyone should do. It's a very important still driver of cancer in the United States. It's the most important driver of modifiable behavior contributing to cancer in the United States. And so, better tobacco, and that's after decades of success in tobacco control, but still, on the order of 30 million Americans smoke a year. So, getting that down through education and counseling and cessation efforts is a really important topic. The NCI is a research organization, and so we're really committed to understanding the science of, what works in terms of implementation access and what causes cancer disparities. And, they're always complicated, and really have to understand what generates these disparities in order to address them. I think the National Cancer Institute has a very strong portfolio in disparities research. It's on the order of, $500 million a year we spend on health disparities questions. I believe we are probably the leading funder of health disparities research in the world. But it is an important question to ask, is that, are we funding the right questions? Are we addressing the right topics? Is that enough money? Should it even be more? The health disparities is such an important area that I think the NCI has to constantly look at, examine what we're doing to make sure that we're really trying to, provide these almost, in some cases, miraculous benefits that we have through science for cancer. But we have to make sure that all patients benefit from these discoveries. And that is, as you said, been a frustrating and challenging endeavor. I do think there are some areas of, bright spots. I mentioned, the uptake of telehealth as a possible bright spot. I think we've seen, some populations, for example, we've seen a decrease in the gap between African American and white patients with regard to cancer mortality. So that's still a gap. It's still a significant problem, but there's been some progress. An area where we continue to see particular challenges in rurality. So rural patients, the gap between outcomes in urban and rural patients continues to worsen in the United States. Rurality is a very hard thing to study. It's confounded by race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status and access. And so the NCI has recently launched several new initiatives to try and understand what drives that disparity and what we can do about it. But, the pandemic, for all the disruption, may provide some opportunity to get a better handle on the science of this, I think.
That's a great point about the potential positives of learning about telemedicine and getting everyone to implement it. So there are some potential advantages that we can have now in closing these gaps. To what extent do you think the cost of care is an issue, and health economics, and what role does the National Cancer Institute have in studying the cost of care?
Right. We have a portfolio in health economics research, and we have a number of investigators in the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences who this topic. Again, we're a research organization, so we're predominantly interested in funding the research into why toxicity occurs. Is there a successful approach to minimize that significant problem for patients? And what is the impact of financial toxicity on outcome? So I think those have been areas where, there's been tremendous scientific interest that's new. That was not a topic that was widely studied 10 years ago, but I think is now, the term financial toxicity is, I think, familiar to all oncologists. And I think the science there has been clear that a new diagnosis of cancer is associated with financial hardship, and that financial hardship is associated with worse outcome, and that certain measures like access to good insurance will reduce the risk of financial toxicity. So I don't think those are just established facts through data in the last few years. The NCI wants to continue to understand, are there other kinds of policies or measures that we can study that will, change that balance? But I think it's very important because we now know this financial toxicity is very common, and it's really decreasing. It's causing significant stress and hardship on our patients, and also worsening outcome. So understanding it is really a top issue for the NCI. We do not at the NCI have the ability to control policy or to fund care directly, or some of the things that we're often asked to do in this space. Our role, I think, is really working on generating the data that then groups like CMS and HRSA and other parts of the federal government can use to try and understand what causes financial toxicity, and then craft policy to limit it, which I think is a goal we all should want to see for our patients. It is, I think, appalling to any cancer doctor that still in the United States we have patients who have to sort of choose between their oral anti-neoplastic and paying their rent. That is a situation that I think we all find untenable, and certainly something where the NCI would like to do all the relevant research to minimize, to reduce the time that occurs. But I also think it's important to say that an expensive medicine that works is a much better problem than no medicine that works, right? So, we have to also, while we're also concerned about drug prices and the cost of healthcare, we also are, pleased to see some of these, in some cases, marvelous new approaches that really are quite good for our patients. And so we don't want to, in any way, decrease that spigot of innovation. That's really the tough balance that I think the federal government has to try and walk here. The NCI has a more straightforward task in this, which is really to try and understand what drives this, and what does it mean for patients, and are there things that we can do that would reduce this? But it's a complicated topic, and I think we'll see a lot of additional work in this area over the years to come.
Hey, on a related subject, what's your thought about diversity in terms of leadership in healthcare and academic medicine? For example, there's a lot of Asians on the front line, very few like me that are CEOs of a large healthcare organization. What's your thought about that, and do you see a role for the National Cancer Institute to play in that?
Yeah, I think this is an area where we do have a role to play. The events of last summer, George Floyd and others, I think caused everyone in the United States to look at this problem of systemic racism in a new light and really ask the question: Are things that we've been doing, are they good enough? I mean, have we really as a society addressed this problem to the fullest extent? Are we ready to make changes that would get rid of these barriers to advancement? And this has caused some real introspection and soul searching at the NCI. I went around and did a number of listening sessions with different parts of the National Cancer Institute to understand this topic better. And a couple of observations. So one is that the NCI is a great place to work. It has a great culture and great mission. People are very happy there. But even a place like the NCI still has some work to do. We have issues related to diversity and leadership, promotion, dispute resolution within the NCI, where I don't think we were being as clear in our goals to address systemic racism as we could have been. We also did a very careful and deep look at who we're funding, because as you know, as an assistant professor is a predictor of future success, becoming a department chair or center director or something. So funding success is a really important career step. And so, I think it's incumbent on the NCI to ask, what's the pool of our fundees look like? And is that as representative as we would like? That analysis was not good. I think that showed that, for example, we don't have enough female PIs. The fraction of women who get R01s from the NCI is too low. We don't have enough Hispanic PIs. The fraction of Hispanic researchers who get funding from the NCI is too low. But in both of those instances, the number of sort of applications and awards are matched on a proportional basis. For African-American PIs, that's not the case. We have way too few applicants and even fewer awards. So, that is worrisome, that there might be some sort of bias in review or bias in the handling of those grants. And so, the NCI has asked itself, what can we do about this? How can we address a very low number of African-American PIs in the RPG pool? And that number's been low stably for a while. And so we've taken on a number of measures to try and address that. And the third area we're looking at is the topic of cancer health disparities. As I mentioned, we have a large portfolio. It's been a topic where I think the NCI has shown real leadership over the years, but it's still important to reevaluate that portfolio and make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that the benefits of research for cancer are felt by all patients, regardless of race, ethnicity, wealth, and access. So, this whole group of things that we're doing is called the NCI Equity and Inclusion Program. It has run by a steering committee called the Equity Council that I chair with Paulette Gray, who's a longtime leader at the NCI. And I think that we've discovered a number of areas where we have a lot of work to do. And I think, a problem like systemic racism is very pervasive in our society, and certainly not something the NCI can solve alone, obviously. But, we can do our part. And so I think we as an organization have tried to figure out where the gaps are and what we can do to address this. And really, most importantly, create substantive solutions that really will make a difference. And that is the hard part, as you know, because there are rules about what the federal government can and can't do. But I think that, the people that work at the NCI who are working on this initiative are very, very imaginative and very creative people who really have some great ideas of things we can do. And lastly, I think the NCI will have to commit some resources to this problem. A problem like systemic racism is not going to be solved for free. And so, this will require new investment from the National Cancer Institute in those three areas I mentioned: our internal culture, the diversity in the RPG pool, the grant, the R01 and P01 pool, and then the topic of cancer health disparities.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm really encouraged that you're focusing on it in such a robust way. SITC and the NCI have had wonderful relationships through the years. A lot of representation, a lot of participation in our annual meeting, which is often in Washington, D.C. What do you feel we could do to even further enhance this relationship to help our common mission of reducing deaths from cancer through stimulating the body's immune system.
Right. Well, I agree with that the interactions between the NCI and SITC have been very profitable and really helpful to the National Cancer Institute through the years. And we really appreciate, SITC's leadership and vision, on making immunotherapy a reality. And all the credit goes to the members of SITC for the successes that, as I said, there was some skepticism. This was not, a done deal in the early days. But I think really the talent and the wonderful scientists who are, SITC members really have scored some tremendous victories for patients. I think, right now, there's, as we said, there's so much going on. There's so much interest in cancer, and there's, both in industry and in federal government and academia, that a group like SITC can be particularly helpful in sort of helping prioritize the field. It is not obvious what next topic in immuno-oncology we ought to take on. The science here is complicated. There are lots of good ideas, and so SITC can be a voice, given its tremendous expertise in this area, of what should the NCI, an organization like the NCI, do, prioritize and fund. I know in years past I've spoken to SITC, and SITC's brought up the issue of training, making sure that we have the next generation of scientists and doctors who understand immuno-oncology and understand the toxicity of immuno-oncology agents and understand math of T cell expression profiling and whatnot. So and I agree with that. I think we've looked at our how we're training, make sure that we have scientists with the requisite skills to really help facilitate the progress in immuno-oncology. I think another thing that SITC can do that's really important and has done is help the American public and particularly the Congress, the U.S. Congress, understand the real opportunities here in immuno-oncology. I attended a wonderful event in Washington before the pandemic where Jim Allison came and spoke about his work on checkpoint inhibitors and that entire story to members of Congress, and it was well attended, and I think we really had a tremendous impact. The members of Congress directly could see and understand what Dr. Allison was explaining about the impact of his basic science investigations, which were, funded with an R01, a basic science grant from the NCI many years ago, but how that had translated into such a, important new set of modalities for patients. And I watched, members of Congress really become excited and converted about this topic. And, then they naturally ask, how can they further support more progress like that? So that's a really important thing that I think SITC can do, particularly now when there's so much discussion within the administration and the Congress about, a significant new infusion of funds for cancer research. So I think helping set that agenda, given the expertise of SITC, is tremendously important.
That's wonderful. Well, we really hope to deepen our relationships with the National Cancer Institute. And we hope we'll see a lot of you, including you, coming to our annual meeting. We hope that to be one of the first live meetings in November. If everyone goes out and gets the COVID vaccine, it should be live meeting. And it's going to be right there in Washington, D.C. We'll give out the second annual Steve Rosenberg Award as well, an NCI investigator that we established an award last year in his honor. And so we always appreciate your participation in our SITC meetings, and hopefully we'll see you then.
Yeah, I tremendously look forward to in-person meetings again. I'm excited to hear there may be prospects of an in-person meeting in November in DC. And, I've always enjoyed attending SITC in the past, and the science is just outstanding, and walking around those posters and talking to those young scientists is such an inspiring thing. So, I very much hope that this is able to go on in person. I'd love to attend if it does.
Well, Dr. Sharpless, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up?
No, I think we covered quite a lot today. I want to, again, thank you for your leadership in SITC and for, being such a great partner for the NCI through the years, and the voice you've given to this important new topic that is complicated. It's hard for the public and Congress to understand immuno-oncology, but it's really important, and so the scientific leadership and the communications effort to the public has been invaluable. And so We really appreciate the opportunity to work together in the past, and look forward to continued robust interactions between the NCI and SITC in the future.
Well, thanks so much. We're really honored that you've spent the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today, and really grateful that you're director of the National Cancer Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you.